Working. Perfect. Great. Okay. Right. So, tell me, where were you born, Dan?
Kennington Park Road in London. Surrey, it was many years before I realised I was a Surrey man. It was only when I heard that the Surrey Cricket Club played at the Oval, and that's just around the corner from where I was born, Kennington Park Road. Sorry about this.
The cough returned. So, what was the first memories that you have?
Well, I can remember being pushed about with one of these little push chairs and going to see some goldfish in a pet shop. And my grandmother and my mother were there. And that's my very first memories. And also running round the corner, I must have been about 2 or 3. I think you better turn that off while I have a good old cough.
Right. So, were you living with?
I think they were. Mother and father were living in a little cottage with my grandmother at 185 Brixton Road. It was a cottage. I think there was either some flats or something attached to it. And I think my dad was being a bit of a caretaker there. And somewhere there are some in the album that you have of pictures. There's some pictures of them, I think, rehearsing in the yard on a bicycle.
And where did you first go to school?
Well, on the other side of Brixton Road, I don't know the name of the school, I was only little, but it was a council school there. I suppose we could actually possibly locate it if we looked in a map of Brixton Road. So that's where I first went to school. And then I don't know what happened, but my grandfather was living further up, the next block to the White Horse pub in the basement, and we moved in there somehow. I can remember sleeping there a few times, but it's all a bit vague when you're very small. Then there's the time that grandfather, Albert, thought he'd start a fruit and vegetable shop on the other side of the road. And so we moved from the basement to the fruit and vegetable shop across the road, which had a flat above it, where we lived. And, well, we lived there for quite a while. As we were moving across the road, they of course had no money. So my grandfather and father, and my grandmother and my mother, and Rhodes and Kathleen, moved all the stuff across the road by hand. So we kids were going backwards and forwards, and at that time I think there was a policeman on point duty just there, and they moved the furniture, the beds, the wardrobes, the chairs, everything. And Auntie Kay, Kathleen, was mortified because she carried the chamber pot across. She had the rotten job carrying the chamber pot. I don't know how long when they lived there. The fruit and vegetable shop wasn't a success. There must have been various reasons for it. But eventually they gave it up. Strangely enough, many years later, Richard and I went to try and buy a car for your mother in Brixton, and which we managed to do. But while we were looking around for somewhere selling cars of the kind we could buy, the fruit and vegetable shop was still there. So we went in, Richard and I went in. We also went into the White Horse pub, because they went into the White Horse pub from time to time and had a drink. It was a horrible place. I never could understand why they went there. Anyway, went in and mentioned to the lady who was serving in this fruit and vegetable shop, I used to live here when I was 2, 3 years old. And she was totally uninterested. And as I was able to explain to her what it was like upstairs, there was a big front room, a middle room and a back room, amongst other rooms, and this middle room had no window but had a little skylight. But like so many people in this world, totally not interested in anything, never gone on there.
So how long did you travel around with the act before they decided that you needed to put you into boarding?
Well, firstly I travelled with my mother and father from 3 weeks old. So I was travelling, and then I was sometimes left with my grandmother. And in 1934 we'd moved to Church Crookham, Claremont House Church, Crookham, which is still there. And as you know, when I did my national service, it was only a couple of 100 yards up the road from where I played a child. So then, for some reason or other, I can't think of me why, my mother and father left me. I was just then going to school, and they left me with a man called Billy Batt and his wife, and they lived in a similar flat in Streatham Hill to the one that we'd lived in over the fruit and vegetable shop in Brixton Road. And I went to school there for a while, and then I went down with what they thought was diphtheria, and I was taken into hospital, and eventually they found out it wasn't diphtheria, and I was able to go home. But then my mother and father picked me up and took me away. But why they left me there, I just have no idea at all. So maybe the idea was to give me an education or something, but not a happy time, not a happy time. Although it did teach me a bit of tap dancing. Was a dancing comedy act, a club act, and used to go out doing it, and I suppose that's how they knew him, but not a happy time.
No. So when did you start to go to boarding school then?
Well, there's a bit of a story to that. My father worked at one time for an act called the Daimlers, and their son, Desmond Henry, was sent to this school, Lindor, of Overton Road, straight Overton Road, in Brixton. I think my father had always had his eye on that he'd like to do that for me. But this was during the war, so they sent me to the school, but it was evacuated to a place called Kimpton near St Albans. And I was totally unsuited to that. Go to bed at 6 o'clock in the evening. There's only about 15 children there altogether anyway. It was only a little tiny school. So I think they tried to give me an education, but prior to that I'd been going to a different school every week with my mother and father, or having periods at home with my grandmother. And so it never worked out that there was a proper education. Although I did learn to read, to write, and do one or two other things. So I was there for a couple of years, 2.5 years. Then the school couldn't continue, the war was on, and it closed down, and I went and joined my mother and father, who were travelling around doing the variety shows. And they said to me, I was about 13 then, and they said to me one day, what are you going to do when you're old enough to leave school? Because you left school at 14. But I was only 15. I said, well, I'll go in the act. I didn't know anything else. I wasn't clever enough to go and be an engineer. Where's I going to live? And so I joined them in the act.
Didn't you go to Hunstanton first?
Well, there was one year that my mother and father were doing what I would call a beach show in Hunstanton. It wasn't actually on the beach, it was just back of the beach, when they were sharing it with a dog act called Della's Dogs. And so Dad and Mum and Dad would do the rope spinning and whip cracking act. They made a little arena and a couple of dressing rooms, and Jim Della had his dogs in one and they dressed in the other. And there was rows of seats, a little fence round, and they would bottle the crowd. That meant collect money off the crowd. That's how they lived. They lived in a tent in the next field to where they were doing it. And many years later, Dorothy and I went back, and I could see all the area, but of course it all turned into caravan places and things like that. But we had a season there, but I wasn't working at the time.
No, I thought you went to boarding school there, didn't you?
No.
You didn't?
No. Rhodes and I went there for the summer with them.
Right. So then you joined the act. Did you, before you joined the act, know how to do anything of their act at all?
Well, Dad had taught the Daimler's son, Desmond Henry, how to ride the unicycle, although he couldn't ride the unicycle himself. And he somehow acquired a unicycle, and then when I came home one day from on holiday to Dewsbury, where they were working, and he said, look, I've got a unicycle. I said, and I got on it straight away and was trying to do it. I'll give you 5 shillings when you can ride across the stage, which he did. And then 7 and 6 if you can do a circle. And by the end of the week, I'd got the 5 shillings and the 7 and 6. So I was very pleased with that. And just carried on from there. But then I went back to school. The school closed. I went to join them. Travelled around with them for a bit. And we were working the Empire Theatre in Nottingham. This was all during wartime. And the manager came and said to my father, "Can you do a bit longer?" Because one of the acts hasn't turned up, so he's stretching all the acts. And so he said, "Yes, if I can put the boy in the act." So the manager said yes, and there I was. I was in the act. And my first job was to, my father used to go out and, my mother used to start with the ribbon spinning, and then my father used to come out and crack the whip in his cape and his cowboy hat, or his Mexican hat. And I used to ride on and give him a rope, or I'd ride on the unicycle, give him a rope, and he would give me the hat and the whip and the cloak, and off I rode around him. And that was the very first thing I ever did. And gradually, as I learned more into the act and put more into the act.
Tell me about the picture with you as a clown.
Yes. That was before I actually started work as such. But Mother and Father were working on the Downs in Bristol for holidays at home. During the war, the government ran a scheme called Holidays at Home, encouraging people, if they had a holiday, not to travel, stay where you were. And so they'd put a circus on. The town would put a circus on the Downs at Bristol. And I think my father must have said, "Can Peter be a clown?" So he made me up as a clown. And I used to run in and out and carry the props in and different bits and pieces. And that's how I really started. It was about it was about the time of the Dieppe landings, which was such a failure. When the Canadians were all sent across to the continent and got massacred. Terrible.
I think you said it was about the time of Stalingrad?
About the time of Stalingrad, that's right. Stalingrad was very big in the news, as was this big Dieppe raid. But yes, that was my very first start. But I actually wasn't working in the act then. I was just had this clown's costume, and my dad used to make me up each day.
So did it progress from you just riding on with...
That's right, yes. Then I gradually learned to ride a unicycle and spin a rope. And then I gradually learned to improve my rope spinning until my father and I, because we were both left-handed, we of course could do routines of rope spinning that he did. I could do it with him, so we could time it all together, which was unusual. Never seen anybody else do that.
But you were saying you worked to him.
Yes, he would do the routine and I would work to him. If you can understand, he would do it and I'd know when he was going to actually lift the rope up and put it on himself and take it off and send it around the back of him, and I could time to him.
And so you know, when you came into the act, the act then started to get better and better work.
Well, they had done good work. They'd always, well, I don't say it always, but just at the beginning, before the war, they started working the Moss Empires tours, and I think they had to do several dates, and then they went to London and were seen by Cissy Williams, and if they were okay, they were approved as a Moss Empires, GCC, Moss Empires, General Theatres Corporation, and Moss Empires, which were combined, and the #1 circuit for the country. And if you were approved, you were away. Went on the variety bills. So there we are.
So then you start the did they do any Palladium?
No, nothing as big as that. They were touring in a show. I think the show was called Deep in the Heart of Texas, and the show had done a long tour, and I was working them, and we were working Her Majesty's Theatre Carlisle, and I was going past. I'd been to the pictures actually, and going past the box office, and the lady in the box office, banged on the window as I was going past, called me over. She said, "I've got a telegram for you from London." And it was like one of these things. The telegram read, I opened it, and it said, "Hold everything, Palladium suggestion next week," because we were on the last week of the show. So, wow, that was really something. And Geraldo was the top of the bill. Tessie O'Shea and yes, Monsieur Eddie Gray, Gangster Brothers and Juanita. It was a very good bill. And I think it ran for 8 or 12 weeks. And that's the time of D-Day. So I think the 6th of June was D-Day. Well, it was around that time because it spanned that period.
And that you know, that led to the other work.
Excuse me. Pardon?
So yeah, that led to the other work that you did, the other Palladium appearances.
Oh yes. Actually, going to the London Palladium was actually wonderful because we worked with all these provincial theatres where little scrotty orchestras and small stages and poor sets and bad lighting and everything. And you get to the Palladium and you go on there and suddenly you've got a fabulous orchestra playing for you, wonderful lights, and everything is first class, and all of a sudden it gets such a lift and you can work so well. And the stage was all black, painted black, not a matte black, like a sateen black. And you just felt wonderful to work in this big theatre with all these people there, absolutely packed out. And yeah, it was knockout to do it.
So what was the routine? You know, between shows and things. What days did the shows start and finish?
I don't really follow you.
Sorry, were there certain days of the week when you travelled?
Oh yes. Monday to Saturday we worked. At the Palladium there was a matinee on Wednesday and a matinee on Saturday. And the mean beggars of the top management, they only paid you the same salary. You had these 2 extra shows to do. They never didn't pay you for those. Every time we never got paid for matinees at the Palladium. It's amazing.
In other places you did?
Oh yeah. Well, usually. But there were nice theatres like the Hippodrome Birmingham and the Empire Liverpool. Very, very, very good theatres, excuse me. I'm suffering with an itchy nose tonight. Oh, it's going to be good for posterity, isn't it? So, yeah. We've stopped in digs, rooms, landladies. Some were good, some were terrible. And it was during the war and just after the war. And it's amazing how quickly a butter ration disappeared and went down, and your jam went down and your sugar went down. I think they used to sort of count on you to feed them. Sometimes they're terrible. I mean, sometimes get you a nice fire in, sometimes they're supposed to provide you the fire in the evening, but we were still going into the rooms after the show and the sticks would still be crackling, so it'd be freezing cold. But we had a box. I remember once we were playing Warrington and nobody had any coal. And I said, "Oh, we can't get any coal, So the fellow and I took this big box that we travelled some of the props in, went down to the coal merchants and chatted him up and got some coal, brought it back and had lovely fires all the rest of the week.
So when did the foreign work start to happen?
That started while I was in the army. And Dorothy and mother and father and I think Silver, their first date was the China Theatre Stockholm, which must have been wonderful because that'd been a country that had been neutral during the war. So it's like going to fairyland. They've got all the goodies and everything. They must have done wonderful.
How was the army? I mean, how did you find it? I mean, you had to go. There was no option, was there?
Oh my God. I've got this wretched itchy nose.
Oh, right. We're going.
Well, went in the army, did the ordinary basic training like everybody else. And
how did you find that? Was that tough?
Well,
or was it
very different. Very different. There were clever chaps in there and not so clever chaps. And very good for you. If I hadn't been married to your mother, I'd only been married. We married on the 2nd of January, and I was in the army on the 3rd of March. So there's no time, January, February, March. 3 months married, not 3 months married, and I had to be separated. And that was the worst part, being separated from your mother. But, what happened? That somehow they were putting on a concert. They were asking for people to go in it. And I said, well, I could go in it, but I had to go to London and get some things. So they gave me 48 hours leave to go up to London. And I picked up a unicycle and a rope and some whips and went down and did this show, this little theatre. There was a very little theatre in the intake area where the people first joined. And this little theatre, and I don't know, for some reason or other, I was asked to do a show for some children, the NCO's children, which I did. And there was a sergeant major there called John Anderson, and he came over and chatted to me. He was such a nice man, and he and I remained friends all the way through. And years after I left the army, he would come and see me. He came and see us. He was from Glasgow, and he came and see us from Glasgow. He used to come and see us and chat. And even when I was in Aylesbury, he came down and sorted me out. And he brought his family over to lunch one day. He's dead now, God bless him. But he and I remained good friends all those years.
What was your number?
22116796.
Amazing, you can remember that.
You can remember that all your life. And I did some crooked things in the army. When I first went in, the very first morning you arrive, and there's these gods of NCOs walking around this shiny booth, because they've all put their best uniforms on in there, looking very slick and smart and banging their legs with their sticks. And there was a long counter, and you got some food, you got a sandwich and some tea, and there's these chaps in these scruffy overalls, and you thought, oh, they must be prisoners. I won't do anything like that. I'll not become a prisoner. And 2 weeks later, you were doing it too. Something to do with your machine there.
No, it's not.
What could it be?
You've got a phone of some sort?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
So it's the phone that's dying.
Ah.
So.
Has it got knocked off the plinth?
Yeah. It's saying it's starving. That's it.
It's,
No. That's it. Sorry.
you're back in it. It does that from time to time, that funny sound.
Weird. Anyway, so it's your first day.
Oh yes. They and it's funny how like attracts like in life. I mean, in the barrack room there'd be guys who played cards, and there'd be guys who went out chasing the naffy girls and the girls in Aldershot, and
It's really marvellous. Richard.
So your first day of the army.
the first day, and there were other people who were interested in theatre and shows and different things. So eventually, I got posted as a trainee clerk, which is not my line at all. But and this sergeant major that I was telling you about, John Anderson, he was in charge of that department. So he asked me to stay on as an NCO there, which I did. I was terrible at it, but it was an ideal place to put on. We used to put on shows and things. And I had a friend called Don Nib, and we used to write comedy songs and sketches and different things. And, yes. And I became quite a friend of the. We had a regimental band, the band of the Royal Army Medical Corps, and I became quite a friend of the conductor, Captain L.D. Brown, nice man. And I was always trying to get him to play swing music, and he was playing military band music. So, but we put on some good shows. Yeah. And one time, I'd been there about a year or more, and we were putting on this variety show. And it happened that Mother and Father weren't working that week, and Dorothy was in the act. So we put on the programme surprise item, and I persuaded Dad and Mother and Dorothy to come down, and we did the act.
The
Big act. And most of these kids, these youngsters and officers, had never been to a variety and seen it, and so it was an absolute knockout. You talk about raise the roof. In fact, the Colonel Murphy, was in charge of the whole place, came backstage to thank my father, and there's me standing to attention saying, yes sir, no sir, and my dad saying, oh yeah, well we're pleased to come down and do it for the boys. So yeah, in many ways I had a good time there. But then after I came out of the army, went back into the act. Now whether that was a good move or not, I don't know. But I did when we went back into the act. But there was never a lot of money in the act for us. When you take an act, see, if you get one person earning, I don't know, £15, two people don't earn 30, they earn 25. If you're just little nobodies, well, there were 4 or 5 of us. And so by the time we took the salary and chopped it down, there's virtually nothing to live on. So we didn't get very far financially.
Well, the places you...
Oh yes, paid good places, but perhaps we didn't have the right agent getting us enough money. So, but we toured again, and we started doing continental work. I remember we were once working at the Palladium. I think it was the time when they were Judy Garland, and Max Bygrave, who was just coming up then, said to me something like, "I feel sorry for acts like you because all the continental acts are going to be coming in and taking all your work away." And it was very strange because when that happened, we went on the continent, we were taking all their work away. So we worked for quite a lot on the continent. But there again, at the end of the day, we didn't have a lot of money.
No, but a hell of an experience.
Oh, wonderful experience, yes. I mean, it's easy, it's wonderful to say, well, worked in Paris, worked in Stockholm, worked in Bremen, worked in Copenhagen, all these wonderful places to be. But some people would do that and get nothing out of it, but we got a lot out of it.
Did you, how did you transport yourself around?
Well, sometimes we went on the train, and sometimes my dad had this ex-army Chevrolet van. I was driving and he was driving, and so on the continent you work from the 1st to the 15th of the month, then the 16th of the month to the last day of the month somewhere else. So you could be working in Paris one day, had to open in Hamburg the next. So you do your 2 shows and then you drive through the night to Hamburg. And we never really missed a show. And that's one thing I'm very proud of, actually, in my own little way, that I never missed a show. I was sometimes very close not to being on, but we got there so late, but I never missed a show. I'm rather proud about that. But, as you know, we travelled about, and eventually it came that we couldn't travel 3 children, and with Stephen, you coming up to school age, you came to school, and we tried doing what my parents did with me, sending you to a different school each week, but that didn't work out. We weren't comfortable with that, so eventually we had to give it up. And we went to live with Dorothy's mother in Blackpool, mother and father in Blackpool. There was 2 children and 1 more on the way, Paula. And when we first got married, we were going, the very 2nd or 3rd day after Dorothy and I had been married, we were going past the council offices in Blackpool, and somebody said, one of the group of us said, "Oh, you want to go down and put your name down for a council house?" And we said, "Oh yes, we'll do that." And we did that. We went in and put our names down. And it turned out that every time they wrote to us saying, "Do you still want a council house?" we'd written back and said, yes, we do. And after Paul was born and we were all sleeping, we were all 5 of us, you, I, you, Richard, Paula, Dorothy and I, all sleeping in one bedroom. And one of you was ill in Mrs. Croft's house. And the doctor came and he said to Dorothy something like, "Do you all sleep here?" And she said, "Yes." "But haven't you got your name down for a house?" And we said, "Yes, we've had it down for 7 years, but not got one." And he said, "Oh, I'll write to them about it." And that's how we got our first house in Blackpool, which was lovely.
Great. That's 1 minute left, so I can just stop this here.
Yeah.
So you're in Blackpool.
That's right.
You're out of the act. What?
Well, about the time that Dorothy and I got married, my mother and father had some friends there who ran a dry cleaning business. She, the wife, had been on the bill. She'd been a singer, and mother and father worked with them. It was Lena Vale and Frank Worth was the name of the act, and they'd worked on the bill at Hippodrome Darlington, I think it was, and they were friends. I think when they played Blackpool, they used to come round and see them. And they'd once said to me, "Oh, if you ever want a job, I've got one, you can come work for us." It was quite a big dry cleaning firm. So I wrote to them and said, was there a job going? And I started there, but it wasn't. I worked there for a year, but it was not for me, really. I really did try to settle down to it. But it's such a narrow-minded world, The head trouser presser came in and everybody bowed to him. He used to go in 10 minutes after everybody. He's important to press the trouser. And office politics and factory politics, which a thing of which I had never known.
You can't take that seriously when you've been in the outside world, can you?
And so I left there. Do you want to know all this side of things?
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I left there, and after after the year, I got a job as a milkman. And that was an all right job, but it paid a little bit more. But eventually, I got the sack from that. For I think they were looking to get rid of me anyway, because I wasn't a good milkman. And I didn't halt at a slow sign, and they came and said, "You've got to leave. Yeah, stand your day and finish." So I went on the unemployment for 3 or 4 months, a bit longer, and while we were there, what happened? Yes, I think I was still being the milkman, and I was doing the odd cabaret. Dorothy and I were doing the odd cabaret. Somebody had found out that we got all the props and got the ropes and that, and could do the odd cabaret show. And occasionally, very occasionally, we'd get a week's work in a nearby theatre. Well, that was absolutely wonderful. And on this, did Dorothy tell you about this while you were talking to her?
No.
Right. We were working the Hippodrome Preston, and where I was earning about £8 a week as a milkman, or £7 a week, I could earn £25 a week in the theatre. Wow. So I'd come home after a day's, what was I doing? I must have been still at the dry cleaners. Anyway, I forget exactly what I was doing, but I was doing something. I would come home, Dorothy get in the van, and we would drive over, my little red and black van, we'd drive over to Preston, do 2 shows, come back, then the morning up and go back to whatever it was. I think it was the dry cleaning I was in then. And on the bill was an act called Vic Ray and Lucille, a dancing act, that we had worked with a couple of times when we were in the theatre. And they were talking to us, and they came from Portsmouth, and were saying that they'd been having a very tough time, because the theatres were dying then. They'd been having a very tough time. And they said, we're working here this week, we've got a week out, and then we've got another week at Bolton, I think it was, the week after. We don't want to go all the way down to Portsmouth, what on earth are we going to do? And we said, well, come over to us and live with us in our house at Limbeck for a week. All you need to do is provide your own food, and we won't charge you to be with us. So they did that. And one day they said, can you look at that little girl with them, of theirs? Can you look after the little girl? We want to go and see a friend of ours at Fleetwood. Charles Carlton Smith. He's the entertainment manager over there. We know him. So off they went, and they came back and they said, "Oh, Charles Carlton Smith wants to see you." "Oh, what do you mean he wants to see me? I don't know him." And he said, "Oh, yes, you do. You dressed with him once. He used to be a comic called Charlie Carlton." So they packed up and went. They packed up and went, and then the next week or a week after that, we drove over to Fleetwood, and there's this chap, very smartly dressed in his dinner jacket, entertainments manager from the town, and we chatted, and he said, "You can do this, you know," because I told him what I was doing. "You can do this," and he said, "I'll be a referee for you." He said, "Well, just ask what they did last year and look at the money they spent and just conduct yourself properly and you'll be all right." So we put the idea into my mind of becoming an entertainments manager. So I applied several places and I got an interview at Scarborough. Didn't get the job, but that was very interesting. And got several interviews, but eventually got an interview in Bristol. In the meantime, Dorothy's mother and father had died, and we were living in Leeds Road. We'd bought a nice house in Leeds Road, but I could see the writing was... I joined Fylde Cinemas then. Could see the writing was on the wall because the cinemas were all closing. I thought, well, it's not going to be long before they close this one down, the Tivoli. And I went down to Bristol, got the job. So came back, sold the house, and went down to Bristol, and that's how I came to be in local government, which was a blessing.
You missed out about Fylde Cinemas. Just tell me about that.
Oh, Fylde Cinemas. Well, while I was scratching around trying to find a job, Dorothy had a friend, a chap called Dennis Critchley, that I had actually dressed with. He was a stooge for an act called Nat Mills and Bobby. But he and I had dressed together. And Dorothy had met him in pantomime or something. Anyway, he married one of the girls in the troupe that Dorothy was in. Because a lot of girls, not just one show, there's loads of shows in Blackpool, all provided with girls by this school of dancing that Dorothy went to. So I went down to see him one night. He was running the Pavilion Theatre, and chatted to him. And I came away thinking, oh, something I could do. So I wrote to the Fylde Cinemas and said, could I, was there any vacancies for a manager? And they wrote back and said, no, there wasn't. And then about a year later, there was an advert in the paper for a trainee manager. And I wrote again and got an interview. Saw this man, Bob Taylor, and while I was there, I said, well, I wrote to you a year ago. And he went over to his filing cabinet and said, here's the letter. Oh, I got the letter. He was so proud of that. He still got the letter. So he and I had about 4 or 5 interviews. I was working at the fruit and vegetable shop at the time. That's what I forgot about. That's where I went. That's where I was when I was working with Vic, went to the theatre where Vic Ray and Lucille were. Anyway, after several interviews, he sent me to the cinema near where Dorothy lived, the Empire, to have an evening there and meet the area manager, which I went. And he was a nice enough man, frightened the life out of me though. Of course, you must remember my academic side wasn't very well developed. I hadn't done any mathematics since I left school at 13, and I was 20 odd, you know, I'd got children and family, but done no writing or anything of that nature. Anyway, they asked me if I'd go back and spend a night in the projection box, and then I'm back at the fruit and vegetable shop the next day, and who should walk in but Cyril Pennington, the regional manager. I thought, oh, sugar. He's, now he sees me doing what I'm doing, he's not going to want me to work for him. But he is very good, he's let me. So I gave my notice in and joined the cinema. Now, I joined the cinema for 5 shillings a week, more than I was earning in the fruit and vegetable shop, which was like £8 or something, or £8.10, and I got £8.15. and then another 5 shillings a week dress allowance. And somebody said to me, "Are you getting a lot more money for that?" And I said, "No, no." But of course, I could see that it could open up the doors to go ahead.
Yeah.
So that's how come I worked for File Cinemas. And I started, and it was a real struggle. I used to do the salary sheets, and I'd work all week on them, draw the money, and then start the next week's salary sheet straight away, because I couldn't add up. No, then I used to take them home. And your mother used to add them up for me. But now I can add up better than she can. So it's funny.
I think you said the lady in the box office used to help you a bit.
Oh yes, Ellen Jelly, she was very good. And Nellie Sherrington, they were all very kind to me. But of course I was a nice boy. I was a nice chap to work for, and always full of, I suppose, fun, full of fun. And I think that most people enjoyed working along with me. Though I could be hard if it came to it. I used to think, after several warnings, it's either you or me, and it's not going to be me through your stupidity.
Yeah.
That's the way it has to be, isn't it?
But the cinemas were beginning
Closing down.
Yeah.
They had, I think nearly 100 when I joined them, and they had 4 when I finished, so, the writing was obviously on the wall. So I went down to Bristol, and that was not the best experience. Very, very good. Big international concert hall, the top artists, the Beatles, the symphony orchestras, politicians, the Prime Minister of the day. But I had worked with lots of top people, so it never fazed me at all.
But not a particularly nice boss. So.
No. He was the sort of fellow who chatted all day and did nothing, and then at night he'd start to do his work when 6 o'clock. Well, I was a family man. I wanted to go home. But he used to sort of be very caustic if you're leaving. You're leaving already, But there again, he was a social climber, and he also was often not there, and so I used to have to run the show and all sorts of things like that.
Then you applied for?
I applied for several. And he used to write things like, "Mr. Prentice is a young man with a family who wants a comfortable, quiet, secure job." That's a very flat praise. Praise with...
damned with faint
damned
praise.
with faint praise, that's right. But eventually I got appointed to Folkestone. And so that was very good. I went there, I liked Folkestone very much. But again, another rotten boss. It's unbelievable. When I used to, I eventually found out about the Civic Entertainment Officers Association, and I applied for that and got made a member on the grounds of my experience. And because in those days there were 2 organisations, the Civic Entertainment Officers Association and the Institute of Municipal Entertainment. The top one was the Institute of Municipal Entertainment, which you could only get access to by examination. So I wasn't going to be very good at that. Anyway, I went to the odd meeting, and when I realised, what a good relationship these chaps had with their bosses, what a terrible relationship I have with mine. There you go, itchy nose. I don't know why my nose is so itchy tonight. And eventually I got this job at Folkestone. I used to go off to meetings and things. I used to go mostly in my own time. The man at Folkestone was a very strange man, John Bullock. The sort of thing he would do, he has a persecution complex. And the sort of thing he would do, he didn't like change. So the reps used to come in with, say, cleaning fluids, so you always bought off the same rep from the same company, and used to buy the same stuff as you bought last year. So there's no change. And sometimes he would wait, he would know that you were seeing the rep, and then he'd go up to the top and meet the rep and say, whatever he's ordered, cancel it. Yeah. And he'd come in and you'd have something on like wrestling. And he'd say to you, how many staff have we got on tonight? Because you'd have to have them on each door and people doing other jobs, you know, in front of the house, tearing tickets, that sort of thing. And you'd say, 7. We can't afford 7, don't be ridiculous. I did, I cut that down. So the next time you'd cut it down to 4 or 5. And he'd come and say, how many staff have you got tonight? 5. We need more than that, don't you realise that? Well, so you could not do anything right. Could not do anything right. So anyway, I applied for lots and lots of jobs and eventually got posted to Deal in Kent, which is great.
That seemed to be when the whole family fortune seemed to come together.
That's right. We had a nice council house where we enjoyed living, and
it wasn't like a council house.
Pardon?
Was it? It wasn't like a council house.
We drove past the other day. It looks
Came
just
with
like
the job.
Yeah. And yes, that's as you say. That's when the family fortunes started to turn, and well, we had a mortgage in Bristol. We bought a house, and I think the rent was £11 a month. The mortgage was £11 a month, or something like that. And I think we had about £60 a month to live on altogether, including before I paid the mortgage. So, when I got to Folkestone, the rent was deducted, and we had as much as the whole salary was before, if you can follow what I'm saying.
Mm.
So that made just that much difference in the living allowance, living money, and yeah, that was good. That was good. And then we went to Deal, and it was no big concert hall there. There was the Little Astor Theatre, which had a capacity of about 300. There was a pier to run. There were the beach plots that I used to let and rent, and then there was the boats to license the boatmen and license the boats and make sure they got all the security and do the town publicity and the catering and you name it. And I did it, and I worked very, very hard there. I think at one time I was responsible to about 30 committees, so I was out virtually every night in the week at a committee meeting, and when the committee meeting was over, oh, Mr. Prentice will take care of that. So I always had work to do from all that kind of thing. But I think I was actually quite popular there. There are very few people I saw this time, last time we went back, because they'd all died. But yeah, there were some nice things in the paper when I left.
It was a special place, and you know, it was a place I think the nearest that we could have called a home.
That's right. Yes.
So how did the next job come up?
Well, I could always do with more money. As I was saying to Doris Cohen, the secretary, the airline I saw her last summer, I was trying to be a manager, to dress like a manager, behave like a manager, on an office boy's salary. And that was the top and bottom of the problem. And but we managed, and we held our head up and that. And so I was looking for a job with more money, to be quite frank. And I went on several shortlists, and eventually got appointed to this job at the job at Aylesbury, where they were building a new, big, lovely concert hall. And it was a good concert hall. It breaks my heart to think that July 28th, I think, is the last concert going to be there. They're going to tear it down. And they were still building it. But it was dead cheap. It was only, I think it was about £780,000, that hall. And one of the big problems I had there was when I went there, they were saying, oh, we've got money for this hall, you're going to build it, and there's going to be enough money, there won't be any mortgage on it. And then there was a change of treasurer, and he took the money that they were going to pay to build the hall and built small factory units with it and put the mortgage on the hall. So consequently, every time the finances were published in the local paper, the Civic Centre had lost thousands and thousands and thousands. 400,000 a year it used to lose. But, you know, think about how much is the mortgage on £700,000? How much is the what they call the central on costs? That's the rates. The council charges itself rates, and that would be £50,000 a year.
On its own hall.
Pardon?
On its own hall.
On its own hall, yes. And then it charged itself for committee reports, the engineers, the plants, the maintenance, the finance, who sort out the finances for you, writing the cheques and all that. And you cannot make these places pay. There's no civic hall I know of that pays. But everyone expected it to pay, but it didn't.
So, talking about, you're in the council, the house that came with the job in Deal.
Yes.
How did you move to the next house and the next house?
Well, we already had, when we were in Blackpool, Dorothy's mother and father died, left us £500, and with that £500 we bought Leeds Road. And, my thinking fell, I don't know what's wrong with it. So when we moved to Bristol, we sold Leeds Road, bought another house in Bristol. When we moved to Folkestone, we went into a council house, so we had that money in the bank from selling
Bristol,
Case Road, and then we were fairly well settled in Church Lane, in Deal, and then we saw this. We got interested in buying a house in round there. We bought that my favourite house, Knoll Lodge. Love that house.
There's a story with that as well, wasn't there?
Well, we started to buy it, and then found out how much the mortgage would be, and we withdrew, and left it for a year, and then it was still on the market a year later, and we went to the estate agents, and they said it's a shame you never took that house. It's really nice, and we said we couldn't afford the mortgage because we're going to get a mortgage through the council, and then she said, "Oh, I can get you a much cheaper mortgage than that," and so we got that cheaper mortgage on it, and then we could afford to go into it. We painted it a lot, did a lot of work on that one.
It's a good house.
Good house, yeah. It hurts you when you drive past it now. You think, yeah, that's a nice house.
It must have made a good sign because it's still out.
Yes, it's the only thing I think could see different from the front, apart from that, they painted it cream, which spoilt it, I thought, and they put a side gate on, I suppose, for security. Apart from that, it's very nice.
So then you moved to
Aylesbury,
and
you left you behind playing discos and things.
So, but you kind of missed out the. You didn't buy a house immediately in Aylesbury, did you? Or what happened?
Well, we went into a council house. I think it was a council house, and at that stage we lost so much money. We sold Knoll Lodge. We had money in the bank, but that wouldn't buy us anything in Aylesbury. And we were in Aylesbury in Chesterfield Place for the best part of a year, and we said to ourselves eventually, this is horrible. Every house you went after, there were 100 people after it. There was never going to be enough houses again. And we eventually scattered around and found a house in Haddenham, horrible little semi, and we bought that just to have a house of our own. Just couldn't be, and living on a council estate like that, it was a horrible council estate, a tiny little house. At the back of us was a square of grass, and there were kids on there and screaming and shouting and playing football, and at night, at weekends, there would be parties going on and loud music. It was not nice to live.
I don't think I ever went there, actually.
Prebendal Farm Estate. That's where all the crooks are, and they said, the police, when I got to the police, said, oh yeah, they're all down there. We know where they are.
So then you got the little semi, and then...
At Haddenham. And then we were there for a year or so, a couple of years, well, 18 months maybe. And again, we saw Auntie Kay and realised, well, you know, we could do an old house up. And we found Turn Furlong Lane, which we bought for 15,000 and sold for 30,000 2 years later. And with that money, we bought Darwin House, the big house, a huge, huge semi that had been a village haberdashery, for, well, we sold Turn Furlong Lane for 30,000. So we doubled the money in 2 years. And how did we do it? We had to pay the mortgage off, and nearly had enough. We were going to have a mortgage on Darwin House. It was called Lustley House at the time. No, it was called Manchester House, sorry, but it had been called Lustley House. So we changed it to Darwin House. And as we were telling you the other day, that we went to the solicitor, went to the building society for a mortgage on it, and they said, "Oh no, you'll have to borrow some money from somewhere else to do it up. Then we'll lend you the mortgage on it." So I went to the solicitor and explained to him, and he said, "Oh, well, if I don't charge you anything, I can get a few £100 off the vendor. You can get in here paid." And that's what we did, and that was how we first started off having a mortgage-free life. Wonderful. Mind you, we had always had a lot of work to do, but it paid off in the end.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So then I worked in Aylesbury until I retired, and then bought a house in Somerton. But we haven't talked much about the show business side of things, which I think is what you're really more interested in.
No, I wanted to have your life.
Oh, well, that's my life up to today.
You've got 4 minutes left.
I've got 4 minutes left. So we bought the old bakery, again for cash. We borrowed £2,000 off Mother's boyfriend. He didn't know we'd borrowed it, but we did. I did actually pay him back, and interest. I swear on my life I did that. And then when I retired from there, we bought that for £46,000, I think, and then sold it for 260 odd thousand. And then we bought Somerton, I forget what we paid for that, and sold that on a reasonable profit, and then came up here to Congleton, paid a lot of money for that house in Congleton. But in the meantime, we'd bought a bungalow from my mother for 50 odd thousand and sold it for 80 odd thousand, which today must be worth well over 100,000. Nice bungalow, that. Anyway, we lived in the house in Congleton for a couple of years, but didn't like it for some reason. It was a lovely new house, but the garden was facing a main road, the back garden, and we searched around and followed you here to Leek, and here we are. Very comfortable.
That's great. That's right up to the point.
Lovely.
Lovely.